Hi, I'm all that stands between you and lunch. So congratulations. So I know at the beginning of the day, everybody kind of did a show of hands thing about how many people are engineering managers and how long you've been an engineering manager. I know there are a lot of new ones in the room. I became a manager, started managing engineers about 10 years ago. And I have to say, I was an awesome individual contributor. I was like the best, if you ask me, at basically everything. And when I took on a team for the first time, I took on this set of peers, right? People that had been my peers a day before. One of them was a super difficult, talented pain in the butt who had wanted the job, so that was awesome. Another one was like a really lovely colleague who was struggling, and as a peer, I felt really frustrated by her, and as a manager, it was suddenly my job to figure it out. Another one, I was grateful for this guy every single day, was just like kind of good at his job, came in and did his work. But I learned, really early that all these things I had done when I was an individual contributor didn't work anymore, right? As an individual contributor, I worked harder, I took on harder problems, I worked longer hours, I did all the things that made me extremely successful as an IC, and I'm sure that was a lot of your experience too. So this talk, I thought, would kind of walk through how do you keep growing your career when all the things you've ever done before don't work anymore. Because that was definitely my experience when I first started managing. So this is my story. These are both me. The first one is me a long time ago, but as a kid, like probably a lot of you, I was a computer nerd. I'm a linguist, so I have a PhD in linguistics now, but from like lifelong was like an ELIZA nerd. I remember sitting in my basement on my dad's TRS-80, like trying to reverse engineer ELIZA, invented a language. It was a big astronomy nerd. I still am. I was very excited about the Mars announcement a couple of days ago and watched it with my daughter, who is now that size and an astronomy nerd. I hit one home run. I wasn't a great athlete. It was like totally the highlight of 5th grade. And I'm telling my story because we're going to walk through your stories. And because I feel that when you're getting to know a team, whether you're taking them on for the first time or you've had them for a while, there's huge value in knowing people's stories. Understanding where they come from, what makes them different, what makes them happy. My very first engineering job, I was interviewed by actually somebody who, in his spare time, discovered planets. He was an amateur astronomer. Like, we worked together at Microsoft at the time, in the natural language processing group. But in the interview, the reason we connected was we discovered we had this bond in common. And this is a guy who's really nice, pretty socially awkward, to be honest, but it gave us this common ground for the rest of our time working together. And it was always a touch point whenever we had harder work topics to talk through. It was always really easy on both sides to kind of bring it back to something where we had a shared interest. So knowing people's stories is really important. Me today, I am the CEO and co-founder of a tech startup called Textio. It's a machine learning and AI company that predicts how your text is going to perform before you publish it. I am now managing the smallest team that I have managed in several years. So our company's been around about a year. So I've done teams that have had 3 people. I've done teams that have had dozens and dozens of people, and I've managed project teams that are thousands of people. And so really operated at a bunch of different levels. I'm still a language nerd. In grad school, I hustled Scrabble to make extra money. So I would play anybody, if anyone here is good. I'm a very slow marathoner, so I'm still like not super athletic, but I still try really hard. This is kind of my story. So this is my team right now. One of them is here in the room today. He's in the back. We can embarrass him. Our director of engineering, who's a fairly new engineering manager. This team has the hardest job of any team that I've ever managed because we're building something new. The people in this team are extremely varied, right? Almost everyone up there is an engineer. One of them isn't, but almost everyone else is an engineer. And one of them turns out loves data. If I give her work where she's digging into customer data, it's just more successful than if I give her infrastructure work. Did I know that when she started? I didn't. Turns out, like, I learned that about her along the way, and you make alignment changes as you go. Could I have known that sooner if I dug into her story a little bit more? Maybe, but this is my team. This is you guys. So you also probably started out as an awesome engineer, and now you are working harder and producing less, probably than you were a few years ago. As an engineer, you were probably very productive. That's why you ended up getting promoted to being an engineering manager. You probably wrote the best code, solved the hardest problems. You were probably really good to work with, just on a human level, or your management wouldn't have put you into a management position. And you were so good at what you do that somebody wanted to tap you to lead some other engineers. Here's probably what you are right now, especially if you're within your first year or two of becoming an engineering manager. You're still an awesome engineer. Like, you probably could do a lot of the work that your team does faster. It may frustrate you that things don't get done as quickly or the way that you would do it. You can't find any time to do your real work because you may still have engineering deliverables yourself, but you don't get to do them during the day because you're managing your team. So maybe you get to start your real work at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. It's when you get to sit down and produce the thing that you're producing. Especially if you have a small team, you're still probably responsible for a bunch of code yourself. And you just can't understand why your team isn't moving faster, right? Because when you had that job, you would have had it done 10 times as much work. You would have had it done tomorrow. So this is probably something, does this resonate with anybody? Like, this is probably something like your journey. It was definitely my journey. We're going to talk a little bit about transitions. We're going to talk about where you were when you were an individual contributor, where you may be now, and kind of where you probably could be. And we're going to walk through a few of these examples, and then we're going to get very practical towards the end of this talk. You're going to leave with 3 questions that you should be able to answer for everybody that you manage. So if you leave with nothing today other than these 3 questions, you should be able to go back and know them about everybody on your team. And it was a good exercise for me to put this talk together because I realized that I should know them about everybody on my team in a way that sort of feels second nature to me now, but it pays to be explicit about it. So I learned some things about my team in putting this talk together. So before, you were the expert in an area. You had a part of your code base that you were great at. No one knew it as well as you knew it. You probably showed up at work and left, especially if you don't have family obligations, which some of you may, some of you don't, but you probably show up and leave with respect to your coworkers whenever you want, right? If you come in late, you come in late. If you have to leave early for something, you leave early for something, because you're getting so much work done. Your job is to deliver your work, and you're getting it done when you want. Where you may be today is you're still an expert, but instead of being an expert in one area, you're trying to be an expert in a whole set of areas because you have a group of people working for you, each of whom hopefully knows more than you do about their area. If you're doing a good job, they do. But it's still really tempting when you're especially a fairly new manager to try to know more about all of the areas than anyone else does, because you still have this feeling like, well, gosh, I'm responsible for delivering this full set of work. And if it doesn't get delivered, who's left kind of accountable for holding the bag? Well, it's probably me. So the way I better do that is to go deep and understand what everybody's doing all the time. You probably work pretty long hours because you're there first in the morning and maybe you leave last in the evening because you're responsible, you're the manager. So you're there kind of, presently for your team all the time. Where you are now is an awesome start, but it's actually not probably where you want to be in a few years. And as you get sort of depth of experience, my hope today is to accelerate that for you so you can just jump there. Instead of being the expert in all areas, you want to be able to go deep at a moment's notice, which is a different thing, actually, right? If you're a strong engineer, one of the things you can do particularly well is learn. Right? You've solved new problems across your entire career. And so when someone on your team has a problem, you want to be able to be there with them. You want to be able to brainstorm. You want to be able to unblock Sometimes in a pinch, you want to be able to write the code. Like, that's definitely still part of your job for many of you. But there's a big difference between living in the weeds on all the areas and trusting that you have the sort of skills in your brain to be able to dive deep when you need to. Give yourself the 3 hours to ramp up that you need to unblock your report, or the half an hour, or the day, whatever it may be. You'll also learn something I didn't learn until I had a child, which I did about 6 years ago. I stopped being the first in the office and the last to leave every day. I was around when it made sense for my team. Sometimes that meant I was absolutely there early, or I was absolutely there late because things were happening where it made sense for my team. But I learned quickly that it made sense for my team if I didn't do that thing in the middle, but actually I modeled for them something I actually still believe, even though my job now, tests me on it every day, which is that, like, I have things that matter to me in my life, and I'm going to be there for my team when they need me. That's a thing that matters to me in my life. It's very important. But I have other things too. And so it really, you become a more refined listener to what people on your team need. You understand how to meet the individuals where they are. And you start asserting a little bit of control over your schedule again. So this one on the bottom is kind of interesting because you start off like, I have all the autonomy. You end up in the middle with like, I have no autonomy. And you finish at the end with a lot more autonomy again. So something to think about. How your day looks like. How you relate. Man, this line on the bottom was huge for me. So before, when you were a phenomenal IC, you probably mentored your coworkers. Why you got asked to be a manager. You may have been frustrated by some of your coworkers occasionally because you're really good at your job. And sometimes if people aren't going at the pace you want, it might be frustrating. Early managers frequently start by mentoring their team. You might get a little frustrated with your team sometime if they're not producing what you want. You're trying to figure out how to unblock them. Really experienced managers, you lead your team. And I know a lot of today is learning about leading and the difference between leading and managing. And they're both actually part of your job, right? When you lead your team, you provide a framework for them to succeed. One thing we're going to talk about in a minute is that your job is no longer doing the work, but a lot of your job is aligning the work. And if you can leave with sort of one thing, think about today that you are successful to the degree that you can align the right work to the right people, which is harder than it sounds like. Instead of getting frustrated with your team, as you become a more experienced manager, you'll learn that you're not actually allowed to get frustrated. Your job is to manage them. And that sometimes means giving them feedback and helping them improve. It sometimes means helping them find a new thing to do. My very first person where I had to help them find a new thing to do was that first struggling colleague that I mentioned the first time I became a manager, and I had to help her find a job within my first 6 or 8 weeks on the job. Really hard for someone that had been my peer, for 3 years before that, right? But it was absolutely the right thing to do for her. And when you go through these situations, you stay compassionate and help them actually find the next thing. But your job is no longer to get frustrated with low performers, but to manage them. And it's a different thing. Where you shine. We're going to talk about aligning the work in a minute. The item on the bottom is really important too. So as an IC, you took on work items. As a new manager, you prioritize work items. As somebody very experienced and leading in your companies, you're identifying the work items and setting them out. And this is a transition that just happens naturally as you grow. So let's talk quickly about 3 things. Given all of that, what your journey might look like. 3 things you should know about everybody on your team, right? What do they do better than the other engineers? We're going to be very, very specific about this. We're going to talk about each of these. Where they find their happy place, important to know, and what stress looks like. Let's talk about each of these. So what they do better than other engineers. Highly encourage you, think right now, think about a report on your team who is the most challenging for you as we kind of go through this exercise. Like, think about who that person is. And ask yourself, what do they do better than either the other engineers on my team or the other engineers that I've worked with, right? And get very specific in your articulation, because it turns out that answering this question is key to your success in aligning the right work to the right people. So I've put up a few examples here. Think about, Melissa stays calm in a crisis. Maybe what they do best isn't a technical thing. Maybe it's a personality thing. That's super valuable. Zeke learns a new code base faster than anyone else. You can get very specific and crisp in your articulation. Then as you have work coming into your team, you can kind of automatically start to be very systematic about who's going to do the best with this work. Because as a manager, your job is to make sure that both the work and the people succeed. If you do both of those, you get promoted again. Phenomenal. Joe has exceptional UI instincts. It's kind of a surface level one. Like, River's code never causes regressions. Interesting. So it tells you something about the kind of work you should be giving her. So get very specific and think, you can do sort of the exercise right now in your head for your most challenging report, because even your most challenging report has something here. It might not be obvious to you what it is, but it's a very important question. So I encourage you to actually write it down. Ask your reports. Ask them what they do better. They probably know, because they're grown-ups who have had careers for a while. They'll probably have a perspective on it. Where do they find their happy place? So a lot of managing people really successfully is knowing how to keep them in their happy zone. In your happy zone, you're sort of productive. You do great work. You feel good about the work that you're doing. So again, get very specific. Like, Melissa gets more done when she works at home. I've seen the pattern over the last month, and I see that if she gets, Thursdays working at home, we get phenomenal delivery the next week or the next sprint. Laura prefers to think about a problem before talking about it. This is a huge style thing that's actually really worth paying attention to, because people really go one of two ways here. They're the sort of, I'm blocked, I really need help, let's talk about it, or thanks for giving me that problem, I'm going to go ahead and think about it for a day and a half, and then I'm going to come back with a discussion prepared for you. But know, for each of the people on your team, where do they find their happy place? Where do they do their best work? And again, write it down. Actually get a specific sentence for each person. You'll be amazed how much it helps you in managing and aligning. Joe and I have better conversations when we meet over lunch, right? Sometimes, somebody may have a more informal style. I had a coworker once who couldn't meet with me over lunch. It was too stressful to be informal. He really needed office one-on-ones. Okay, that's not my style, but as a manager, you meet people where they are, right? And so very important to know, what are they great at? Where do they find their happy place? Kind of rounding this out, what does stress look like? So I can tell you, when I get stressed, I move really, really fast. I want everything to sort of close, now. I want to make decisions really, really quickly. I want to execute and get through the stressful time and get all the decisions done. Not everyone does. It turns out, I learned in managing that some people, when they get stressed, don't move fast. They stop moving. It turns out that's really common. I didn't know that. So you think about what stress looks like for each person, so you can anticipate when somebody is having a challenge in a stressy kind of way before they've told you about it. And sometimes this is really subtle, right? Joe, who's usually really talkative, he talks a little bit less in team discussions. If you see that a couple weeks in a row, you pay attention, because you have a relationship with these people, you know their story, and you know their pattern of performance over time. Or River spends too much time on code review feedback. This is what she does when she gets extremely stressed. It gives her a sense of control. There's something she's good at here. She can give feedback on other people's code, so she's going to kind of go to a place of comfort. But once you start understanding for your reports, again, write it down. This is one that actually your employees will be less good at telling you their own sort of manifestation of, because it's often here before it's here, right? For people, they often feel the stress before they know that they're feeling the stress. But again, get very specific in these articulations. It will help you. One thing we do, these are some people from my team, one thing that I love to do when I have a team where the size, given that I know the answers to those 3 questions, is every week or two doing an explicit alignment exercise, right? Go up to your whiteboard, put up everybody's name, and write down what they're doing right now. What are they doing this week? What are they doing next week? You don't have to get every work item, but sort of big bulk areas, what are they responsible for? It becomes very clear over months and months of doing this, which I've done in the past, which people take on too much consistently, who are the people you're always load balancing away from, which people are always underloaded, and so, it could be a lot of reasons for that. They're finishing their work quickly because they're great, or they don't take on as much, right? But when you do this week in, week out, you start noticing patterns across people on your team. And when you're very explicit about the load balance and alignment exercise, the whole team works better. Your team will appreciate that you're doing this because people who are constantly overloaded don't actually want to be. Even people who want to challenge don't want to feel overloaded. But it's very helpful to kind of just do that whiteboard exercise of aligning once you know what makes this person great, where's their happy place, and what does stress look like? Because those are the inputs into how you start moving items around. So we're mostly out of time other than questions. We'll kind of wrap up. So your game plan, leaving today, go ahead and answer those 3 questions for everyone on your team. Rob told me we want to really leave with actionable steps, so I tried to make a homework assignment. Play your IC chips thoughtfully. Be very thoughtful and careful about when you choose to dive in and how, and really align the work across your team every single week. Whenever I haven't done this, I have regretted it. And so that's what I have for you today. Questions or comments or thoughts? Thank you. And that's us.